The conversation of your life. Local, relevant, digital, and always on.
America will hear my 2 cents.
Elected to serve iHub radio listeners across the desert cities. He calls it as he sees it.
Quick question.
Now, here's Russ Betts.
Someone answer him now!
All right, well, there is an election going on. I know with all this COVID news, coronavirus news, you'd hardly know it, but Senator Jeff Stone, well, is no longer senator. He resigned his seat, and there's 2 candidates vying for that position, Elizabeth Romero and Melissa Melendez. And they got to be wondering, how do you campaign at a time like this? Well, you do. I don't know. Some of them got signs out. I see Melendez's signs out. But anyhow, vote by mail ballots came out. You've got them. And do your duty and mail them back in. That's going to be about most of the campaigning you're going to see is what you see now, because they can't go door to door. All right, we're going to get started here. At some point in time, it's going to be time to restart our economy. I mean, closed businesses will open again. And no question about the seriousness of the virus. Every time I lean towards this is over, I see a story about how deadly this virus has become. It's sudden death for some people. I mean, it's highly contagious. If you end up on a ventilator, the odds are you will not live. They're saying 80% of the people that go on ventilators do not survive. And this is people that are otherwise healthy. I know we hear it's about only the old, but, they weren't going to die anytime soon. And all of a sudden, they get very sick and they die. They suddenly get a cough, they have trouble breathing, they can't catch their breath, and a few days later they're dead. It's deadly serious. At the last count I checked last night, there was 38,000 Americans who have died from this disease across the U.S. Now, we've all heard those numbers, we've all heard those stats, you know the details of the death, and if you're paying the least bit of attention, you know that we have a world health pandemic upon us. But there's other stats that we aren't becoming aware of, at least not yet. And I call it the economic health pandemic. We now have an economic health pandemic upon us. And it's going to cause deaths, but those deaths are going to be much harder to track. Poverty brought on by lost businesses and lost jobs. Well, that means millions more without access to the things in life that keep us healthy and alive. Already we've put off cancer screenings. Try to get into the City of Hope for a follow-up on your test results for your cancer treatment. They're asking you to hold off. You don't really need to visit right now. Time held off with cancer screenings is deadly. And after the full force of this hits the economy, the impacts of poverty on health will become even more prevalent. Now, right now, hospitals are being impacted in a big way. They're being hit very hard financially, and they were already struggling financially before, and that was during a good economy. After this, will they be there to help? And if so, in what diminished capacity? Maybe where they could provide the kind of care that would save a life, that care might be less than it was before. So we got 2 scenarios that we're facing at the end of this spectrum when it comes to the business side of all this. Either the economy gets started and we return to an economy that's not too bad, but struggling, or we end up with economic devastation. Now, if you look at the news stories published by experts, some are suggesting we must wait until 2022 to reopen, to restart the economy. And that's not a slip of the tongue. People actually believe these lockdowns should continue for another year and a half. And I'm sure you've heard talk about waiting for a vaccine to be developed before the lockdowns can be ended. That's a year, if you can even develop a vaccine. Some people are offering a shorter time frame, saying, well, maybe the end of December. And a source out of the governor's office, if we can believe that source, is saying that mid-June. Mid-June is the date. Well, June 15th, if that's mid-June, is 58 days from now. Can you go 58 more days? Now, last week in the show here, I detailed what other countries are doing to get back to work. Countries that are ahead of us in the progression of this pandemic. They are getting back to work. Last week, it was Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, China, all getting back to work. Now, Denmark and Australia are making the moves. Denmark sent kids back to school last week. And Australia is making plans to gradually lift its coronavirus lockdown. And here's what the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says on the subject. I won't do the Australian accent, although I'm tempted. Having worked through the road in, the country's attention must turn now to that road to recovery on the other side. It's going to be step by step. There's going to be some trial and error. This is completely uncharted territory. No country in the world has worked this out yet. We will all work together, and we will find a way through. What that all says is a very clear decision has been made in Australia to move ahead with opening up the Australian economy. It's not a necessity. Nobody is saying now just flip the switch. Nobody is saying, okay, pandemic over, let's all go back to work. It's gradual, it's cautious, but it is reopening. It's a stepped, measured process. Now, I've had the benefit of watching the start of the coronavirus before it came to the U.S., before it even caught the attention of the U.S. I have friends and family that live in China, and I heard the details. My wife is one of those people that mark a calendar with significant dates, and she has January 21st marked on her calendar. That's the day our daughter announced to everybody in our house, hey, you should see what's going on in China. And that's when our family started to take family precautions. We were wearing masks in February, early February, and we listened in disbelief as the CDC said, well, wearing masks is a bad thing. And New York City Mayor de Blasio said, coronavirus is nothing to worry about, and come on down, enjoy, and go about your daily lives. This thing isn't even contagious. We were hearing exactly the opposite from our friends and family. Our friends and family at those times were living through the worst of the curve. We saw that schools had closed in China as a measure to stop the spread. I suggested to the school district that our schools should also close. I said at least take the spring recess 2 weeks early so we can see how this thing develops. I took some heat for that public position, but it was the right call. Anyhow, I digress. The topic is, when do we begin to restart the economy? Last week, I used an analogy of reading a book with 10 chapters. We are on chapter 5 or 6, and other countries are on chapter 8 or 9, and they're getting back to work. And you know what? We have the benefit of reading ahead. We can see what other countries are doing ahead of us. We can see the chapters that we aren't at yet. Now, I have a dear friend in Wuxi, China. He told me what was taking place, and it's bad, he said, when I was talking to him back in February. He was holed up in his apartment for 15 days. That sound familiar? That's where we are now. Then he said, hey, we can finally go out. Then he said the small stores can open. And then he said factories started and people are back to work. He said he hoped the restaurants and the pubs would soon be open again. And they were. And this thing has progressed. And those are the conversations I had with Malou as it did. And those same conversations my wife had with her sister living in China. They're on chapter 8. We're on chapter 5 or 6. Can we follow their course? Can we reopen on May 15th or May 30th? Now, I'm just a lowly council member, and for those of you that are new listeners to this show and just tuning in, my day job is as a council member in the city of Desert Hot Springs. I'm not reckless, and I am so aware of the dangers of this health pandemic. I'm as cautious as anyone can be. We wore masks weeks ahead of health officials finally agreeing, yes, it's a good idea to wear masks. We have a hair salon. We closed our hair salon 10 days before any order was given to close. I'm pointing this out because I understand how serious this is. A sign on our window said going on vacation because nobody yet was contemplating closed by governor's order. But like everyone else, I see the dangers of this virus. But it's not also hard to see the dangers of this growing financial health pandemic. Businesses will not survive. People are going to be out of jobs. Unemployment will be in the double digits. If the lockdown goes much longer, people are going to lose their cars to repossession. They're going to lose their homes to foreclosure. They're going to be out on the street. And if it goes to 2022, as some people are incredibly saying, you're going to see a complete and total societal economic collapse. Anyone suggesting that 2022 should be the date we were open should be laughed out of the room, and then they should be stoned. We don't have the option to go there. The Australian Prime Minister said it very well. Having worked through the road in, the country's attention must turn now to that road to recovery on the other side. And it's not an either-or proposition. It's not stay closed or stay open. What were the gradual steps we took to tighten things down? Those are the steps to retrace as we open back up. You know, we got a financial health pandemic, and it's going to be deadly. The process to restart our local economies has got to come sooner, not later. 2021 is too long. 2022 is fanciful, deadly nonsense. Unless something changes, unless these numbers go wildly spiking again instead of dropping like they have been, especially here in Riverside County, then May 15th or May 30th are the dates that we should start to restart our local economies. Now, I've got some more on specific dates and countries. All right, let's take a look at some of those, what some of those countries are doing. We got Denmark. Schools are already open. Germany, schools will open May 4th for children in the final years of high school or middle school. High school seniors and 8th graders are going to be sent back to school so they can have a proper finish up of their school year. The Czech Republic, it has a limited range of non-essential shops that have reopened, and people can now walk and cycle without masks. And if you travel overseas, you must quarantine for 14 days upon your return to the country. On May 25th, the pubs will open. Wine bars and restaurants can reopen. Their final open date is June 8th. Now, Italy's now reopened bookshops, laundries, stationery stores, clothing stores, some industrial sectors back to work. And they've set May 4th as the day to end the full lockdown. Spain, April 27th date to end the lockdown. Austria, small shops now open, parks are open. And if the numbers stay as they are, all shops will remain open. Will reopen on May 2nd or 15th. And Denmark has opened up their daycare facilities, and there you go. All right, it's Russ Betts on iHub Radio. We're back with lots more. Glad to have you with us. iHub Radio in downtown Palm Springs on the Russ Betts Show.
The conversation of your life. Local, relevant, digital, and always on.
America will hear my 2 cents.
Elected to serve iHub Radio listeners across the desert cities. He calls it as he sees it.
Quick question.
Now, here's Russ Betts.
Someone answer him now!
All right, well, we just finished up with our opening monologue and basically taking a look at when can we start opening up. And I can hear it now. Oh, my God, what do you want to do? Isn't people's health more important than the economy? And I just made the point that, like a lot of other countries, we ran down the list, that, there's going to be some tragic consequences, including deaths, if an economy just totally crashes. We're already going to see some problems. So, yes, it's a balancing act. And I'm looking out here, and I see an article here in CNN. It said, Philadelphia didn't cancel a parade during a 1918 pandemic. The results were devastating. I don't know exactly why CNN is highlighting that story, but do you hear anybody out there saying, well, let's just go start up a parade? I mean, I'm looking at this picture from 1918 that they published, and there's people just next to each other like crazy and, totally reckless in the face of the 1918 pandemic that went through. And I don't hear anybody talking about that. So if you hear somebody sit there and say, oh, you don't care about people's lives, say yes, we care about people's lives. That's exactly what the point is. And yes, it's cautious, and yes, it's stepped, and yes, there's a progression, and nobody's talking about going on to a big parade like they did, where was that, in Philadelphia in 1918. It's just absurd to even suggest as the Spanish flu hits Philadelphia with huge numbers of people as a result of that got killed or died from the Spanish flu. So no, nobody's projecting that.